And I heard it and I just got goosebumps. It's like, oh my God, this is me. Hello, I'm Kirsty Hawkshaw from Opus 3 and this is the story of It's a Fine Day. I just remember music was always in the house. My father, Alan Hawkshaw, he was a very prolific library musician. I grew up listening to music because he had a studio above my bedroom. I think a lot of my influences came from falling asleep and listening to him compose. My childhood was amazing, mostly, but, I did have my formative years in the 70s. I was very disciplinarian at school. So by the time I was 7, I was a bit anxious, to say the least, But that's kind of where the rave scene finally came in, and that's where the real healing started. I thought ravers were really ridiculous to begin with, because I was into 4AD and indie music. I just thought they're idiots, taking drugs and wearing all those silly outfits. I was dating this guy at the time and he went out with his brother and didn't invite me, so I got peed off about that. And my mate Mark said, "Oh, sod that, why do you come to one of these raves? We're going out raving tonight." I was like, "Oh, I don't know." I ended up going. I walked in and the atmosphere was unbelievable. Like, there was fairground rides, everyone was smiling, wearing onesies and pyjamas, and I was like, what is going on? This is brilliant. And I started dancing and I didn't stop the whole night. I literally had what I can only describe as a spiritual epiphany. I just felt all this shit that I've been carrying for years was just released. And I hadn't even done any drugs at that point, I was literally, and people were coming up to me and going, What are you on? And I said, apples. I've been working for 3 or 4 years, doing secretarial stuff, and I thought, I don't want to be part of this system anymore. I want to get out of this system. You get up at 8, get to work for 9, you leave at 5. This isn't my life. And a lot of people around my age, they were going off travelling, but I stayed in England. I thought, I'm going to get to know England and hang out with this lot and go to free parties. Why do I need to go anywhere else in the world? It was really good to begin with, but by the end of 1991, it started to get really dark. I just felt that I don't belong here anymore. This isn't my frequency, or whatever you want to call it. They squatted a mansion somewhere in Surrey, got onto the front page of the news, like these revellers wrecking houses, and there was crystal chandeliers that they were knocking down and making jewellery out of, and I just thought, this isn't me, they're just smashing everything up. And I went out into the garden and I had a conversation with a tree, as you do. I had done a little bit of acid, to be fair. The tree said, "Go, this isn't who you are." And I left.
Yes, I've lost the plot.
I used to ring my dad once a week on a Sunday, and I rang him up and he said, "Oh, Kevin's trying to get hold of you. He's got this track that he wants you to hear." So I said, "Oh, okay." So I rang Kevin. I hadn't spoken to him for a while. I get this tape a couple of days later and it said Opus 3, It's a Fine Day. Opus 3 were Kevin Dodds, Ian Munro and Nigel Walton. They somehow sampled Jane's vocal, Jane Lancaster. And I heard it and I just got goosebumps. It's like, oh my God, this is me. This is my song. This is something I resonate with. It's beautiful, it's positive. I rang Kevin up the next day and I said, definitely want to do this. So I got on the bus up to Sunderland and sang it in the kitchen. It was really, really difficult because they wanted me to sing it exactly like Jane, but I sound like me, and I was starting to feel a bit robotic and I was getting frustrated, and I used to put myself in a circle of crystals, I had all my little things that I used to do to try and protect myself and open up to the universe and all of that. I'd been singing it all day and it just wasn't quite getting there, and then John the hairdresser turned up with his little boy. He had a calming presence. I knew he was sitting in the other room while I was in the kitchen with his little boy, and I was thinking, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to sing to that little boy what it's like to be in a field, looking at all your friends in the eyes and really connecting at 4 a.m. as the sun's rising. And that's when the magic happened. Pete Tong, he championed it. I started playing it on the radio and I played it to my friends and they were like, oh, what are you going to do? You know, are you going to sell out now and become a pop star? And I said, no, it's hardly as if I'm going to sign to PWL, is it? And then they'd sent it to PWL as well. And then the next thing, Pete Waterman slamming his fist on the table saying, I want that record. The other band members, they were like, we're going to go with PWL because they're the hit factory. And I was like, no, I can't do that. We ended up signing with them because it was 3 against 1. It literally took off. We white labelled it, sent it out to the DJs, and it just went literally crazy. I remember getting a knock at the door. I think it was about 4 days before it was officially being released. And it was The Sun newspaper. They just found my address. I just got out of bed. I had a T-shirt on. I was like, I opened the door really tired. And they had a microphone and everything. I was like, hang on. I said, wait there. And I rang up PWL and I said, did you send The Sun over? And Sharon said, tell them to go away. That was frightening. I was like, oh my God. And then I rang my manager and he said, you better prepare yourself because next week you're going to be really famous. And I was like, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. And I was like, oh my God. And then it kind of started hitting me. But then I just got through it, you know.
Here comes one of the best records around at the moment. Slip those palms together for Opus 3, The Infectious, It's a Fine Day.
When I was on Top of the Pops, which was my childhood dream, by the way, there was 2 girls in the crowd and they said, we saw you at Spiral Tribe Rave. And so I just sang it for them. You know, I was glad that I had some support, that there was that connection. Before I ever go on stage, and I still do it now, I say, Mother, you do everything, I do nothing. And it worked. So I was able to do it. I spun my balls and sang live at the same time. That was how I coped with my anxiety. Just spin your balls and get through it. And even with interviews, I tried to say as little as I possibly could. Because I didn't, you know, I was young, I didn't know much about life then, you know, and I was able to do a good 2 years of promoting, but eventually it was too much. I was a very young girl. I was 23 at the time, but I was a young 23, you know. We didn't have all these mediums where you can connect with your friends, and you're lucky to make a phone call from Japan for about a minute, you know, when I was out there. It was quite scary, actually, being disconnected from you know, your friends and family.
It's a Fine Day. We played a burst of. Catchy ditty, very nice indeed. Number 5 at the charts at the moment?
Yeah.
Now, what are you doing?
I'm playing with my balls, Jonathan.
What's the purpose of this? This is a new age thing, I gather?
Yeah, I suppose so. It's very relaxing.
Have you ever seen the film The Caine Mutiny? Well, it's lost on you, that reference then. So, I find it terribly distracting. You wouldn't mind just putting them down for a second, would you?
I knew Orbital through my friend Sally Harding. I met her at a rave and she said, oh, you must meet Paul and Phil, because she was going out with Paul at the time. She said, oh, you should do something together. And this is before Fine Day. Paul called me up I think it was about 6 months after Fine Day came out and said, I've got you. So I went to their house and he played it and I just burst into tears. I was a bit burnt out by this point. Yeah, it was just lovely. And then they said, oh, do you want to be in the video? I saw a clip the other day and there's a makeup artist touching my makeup on. She got a fag in her mouth. So like the days where you just like, oh my God. The etiquette is diabolical nowadays. People think they can just do what they want, take your vocal, release it, I'm constantly having to do takedowns. I'd heard a rumour that Skrillex had done he was playing it out, but I didn't believe them. I was thinking, Skrillex isn't going to go nowhere near me. He's massive, forget it. But he did it, and then he released it. But he hadn't cleared the vocal. And we looked on Spotify and it said vocals by Skrillex. I was like, that's not fair. I wrote some comments to try and get their attention. Like, mate, you've used my vocal and you haven't cleared it. Vocals by Skrillex, But Boys Noise, they did get in touch. They replied and they were really nice about it. And then we did a deal. And Skrillex actually wrote me a really nice apology. And I said, it's water under the bridge now. Like, thank you, but it's fine, Shadow Child contacted us about a year ago, and he'd done a lovely version of it, which had a lot of the original elements replayed. We really liked it, and he wanted to release it on his own label, but we said no. But we'll do it with you if we can release it on our label, 181. And I love it. It's a really good updated version. I think I sang it okay again. That's probably the last time I'll be able to sing it because your voice does change. So I'm doing new stuff now. But yeah, I don't think I'll be doing it when I'm in my 60s. I've got to hand it over at some point. Yeah.